Welcome to the deep dive. Ever jumped into an online game and thought, how the heck does this even work?
Yeah,
Well, that's what we're diving into today. Online multiplayer game development with Unity.
we're using Unity multiplayer.pdf as our guide. It's got a ton of great info on how developers create those seamless online experiences.
So, say you've got this awesome idea for a game, right? Epic battles, players teaming up all over the world, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
But even before any of that magic can happen, you got to actually get those players connected.
Which, yeah, sounds simple enough,
Right.
but it gets really complicated surprisingly quickly. It's like, imagine trying to build a bridge, a real bridge, between every single player in your game. That's basically what we're doing. And our source breaks down the two main approaches to this. So peer-to-peer and client-server. Peer-to-peer is kind of like, think of it like handing someone a message directly.
Yeah.
It's the fastest way to do it if you're right next to each other.
Right, like those old school LAN parties.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Perfect for that. But not so much for, massive online worlds.
Right, because you can't exactly run a cable across the ocean.
Yeah, exactly. That's where client server comes in.
Mm.
So you've got this central server, acts as this kind of hub,
Right.
manages all the communication between the players. So instead of everybody talking to each other directly, they talk to the server, and the server relays the messages.
So it's like a digital post office, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Make sure everyone gets their messages without needing each other's, like, home address or whatever.
Mm.
But even when you've got the right model, there's this thing called NAT, Network Address Translation. And honestly, it's one of those technical details that can be a bit of a headache.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds like it's about to get complicated.
It can be. It's true. Think of it like this. Have you ever tried to have a phone conversation when everyone has the same phone number?
Right. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, exactly. NAT is kind of like the system that helps route internet traffic within a network, but it can make these like direct connections between players really tricky.
So how do they get around this NAT roadblock? I mean, our source mentioned there are workarounds.
Oh yeah, there are definitely some clever workarounds.
Yeah.
Um, so there are these tools. One is called stun and the other is turn.
Yeah.
And they act as these like intermediaries. They help to bypass NAT restrictions. So imagine you've got like a dedicated operator who connects your calls.
Okay.
That's kind of what stun and turn are doing.
Yeah.
But for game data.
So it's like stun is saying, hey, can you try connecting directly? Sometimes it works.
Right.
And then turn is like the reliable backup, like, all right, fine, I'll relay the message for you.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And that's how they make sure those crucial game data packets, the ones that determine if your attack lands, if you pick up the item, all of that.
Right, those little bits of information that make or break the game.
Exactly. It ensures that they actually reach their destination,
Oh.
even with these NAT setups.
That's clever. But,
Uh.
okay, so everyone's connected, they're ready to go.
Right.
Now there's the question of, well, who are they playing with? Nobody wants to wander around an empty online world.
Exactly.
That's
yeah.
where matchmaking comes in, right?
Yeah, matchmaking. This is crucial for a good online experience, and it's basically like choosing your battle arena.
Mhm.
Our source talks about a bunch of different systems for this, from like really simple server lists to these super complex algorithms that pair players based on their skill levels.
So it's like the difference between just, rocking up to a random arcade cabinet versus like signing up for a tournament with, meticulously ranked players.
Exactly, and everything in between,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah,
All right, so we've got our players all connected, they're matched up, ready to go.
ready to rumble.
Right. But now, imagine this. You're one hit away from victory, about to pull off the most epic move. And then suddenly,
You lie.
your opponent's character is like teleporting across the screen.
The bane of online gaming, lag, is that annoying delay that can totally make or break the experience.
For sure. And our source actually goes deep into, how developers combat that.
Oh, yeah?
It's really fascinating stuff. So, like, what are some of the techniques, the tricks of the trade to make things feel smooth when the internet is anything but smooth?
Well, one of the big ones is something called client-side prediction. So instead of, your game waiting for the server to confirm every single little action, it actually tries to anticipate what you're going to do next.
So it's like my game's reading my mind.
Kind of. Well, not quite mind reading. It's more like it's predicting your intentions based on your input.
Okay. Yeah.
So like if you're holding down that forward key, right, the game's going to assume that you want to keep moving forward, even if it takes a moment for that server to catch up and say, yep, they're definitely still holding that key.
So, like, it keeps things feeling responsive, even with that little bit of lag.
Exactly.
But then what happens if like the game predicts wrong? What if I run into a wall that it didn't know about yet?
That's where server reconciliation comes in, right?
Yeah.
So the server is always the ultimate authority. It swoops in and corrects any like little discrepancies between what your game predicted and what actually happened in the one true game world.
So it's like constantly making sure that everyone is on the same page, reality-wise.
Exactly. Exactly. And then for the movement of the other players, there's this thing called entity interpolation. So instead of other players, kind of jumping around really erratically because of lag, the game, what it does is it smooths out their movement.
Okay.
So it creates this illusion of much more fluid motion.
Oh, that's really cool. So even if someone's connection is a little bit, jittery, they're not just like teleporting all over the game world.
Exactly. It's all about masking those inherent limitations of, the internet.
Right.
But smooth gameplay is only one part of the puzzle. Right?
Yeah.
We also need to talk about trust, or rather the lack thereof, when it comes to the online world.
Oh, right. Because where there's competition, there are always,
The rule breakers.
yeah, the cheaters, the hackers.
Oh, yeah. The
They-
bane of online gaming, for sure.
Exactly, exactly. And I feel like, yeah, our source talks about this whole balance of trust and authority in online games. Like, when you're playing a single-player game, you generally trust that the game itself is going to enforce the rules.
Right.
But when you introduce other players into the mix, that trust gets a lot more,
A lot more shaky.
Yeah, exactly. Because you can't be sure if that crazy shot that just took you out, was that like legit skill or was that some sort of hack?
Right. Is the game glitching or is this on purpose? So that's where server-side validation comes into play. So instead of relying on just the players to be, the arbiters of truth, the server is really that central authority.
Yeah.
It scrutinizes every action.
So it's like having a referee constantly watching, making sure there's no fouls or illegal moves or whatever.
Exactly. So let's say, a player fires their weapon in the game. The server's going to check, okay, does this player actually have that weapon equipped? Is it loaded? Are they within range? Are they, line of sight of their target? And if any of those checks fail, the action just gets rejected.
So it's like this constant behind-the-scenes fact check, basically.
Exactly, to keep things fair.
Right.
It's not foolproof. Obviously, those clever cheaters out there are always finding workarounds. But server-side validation is that crucial line of defense.
Right.
Right. You're trying to protect the game for everybody.
Okay, so we've talked about all the challenges, the workarounds, the clever tricks.
Right.
But now comes the part where we actually get to build the thing.
Yeah, the fun part.
Right. And this is where Unity really shines, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Unity is like this giant digital Lego set for game developers.
Okay.
And it's especially great for multiplayer games. Our source goes really deep into all its features.
Okay.
And it's super impressive stuff.
So give me the highlights. Like what makes Unity such a game changer for this kind of development?
So, for starters, it has this really powerful feature called Netcode for GameObjects. NGO for short.
Okay. Yeah.
So imagine trying to keep track of every single object in your game world, right?
Right.
All the players, all the projectiles, power-ups, everything.
Right, and making sure it all behaves the same way for everybody.
Exactly. Even with lag, right?
Oh man, that sounds like a nightmare.
It would be a coding nightmare without the right tools, honestly. But that's what NGO is for. It just takes care of all that heavy lifting behind the scenes. It helps synchronize the game state, across all the different players.
Right.
And make sure everyone's literally playing the same game, even if their connections aren't, perfectly in sync.
So it's like the conductor of an orchestra,
Yeah.
right? Making sure all the instruments are playing the right notes at the right time, even if somebody's a fraction of a beat behind.
Yes. A perfect analogy. Yeah, it's like NGO is taking care of telling all the other players when a new object appears in the world. Like if, somebody fires a weapon or casts a spell.
Right.
So it handles all that replication.
That's amazing. And our source mentions another cool thing, Unity Gaming Services.
Yes.
What are those all about?
So Unity Gaming Services, these are a game changer, especially for smaller developers or indie developers.
Okay.
Because they give you all these pre-built features that you can just plug right into your game. Things like setting up lobbies for multiplayer, managing connections. Through relays, you can even add voice chat and text chat.
Wow, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Exactly. You can really focus on what makes your game unique.
That's awesome. So, I mean, do we actually get to see this stuff in action?
We do. Our source actually walks through building a prototype online fighting game
Yeah.
using all this stuff.
Oh, that's so
It's
cool.
a really good example, too, of how all these concepts kind of come together. They start with the player characters.
Yeah.
Each of them has their own health bar and, like, movement, different attacks.
Okay.
And then, of course, you have the system that figures out who wins and who loses.
Right, right. Which in a fighting game, I'm guessing it's whoever's left standing at the end.
Exactly, the last player standing. But even with a concept that simple, there's actually a lot going on under the hood to make it work online.
Right, right. Because you've got to take all those things we talked about before
Exactly.
and make sure they all work together seamlessly.
Right, and that's the beauty of, really diving deep into game development. It's like you start to realize how much complexity there is behind these experiences that we kind of take for granted.
Totally. It's like, you never think about how much engineering goes into like building a ballpoint pen, but somebody had to figure all that out.
Exactly.
So for our listeners out there, what are the key takeaways? What should they like be thinking about as they go forth into the world of online gaming?
Well, I think number one is that building these online multiplayer games, it's a really complex thing to do. There are a lot of unique challenges. Latency, cheating, making sure the experience is smooth and fair for everyone.
Right. Challenges that thankfully really talented developers are finding, solutions to every day.
Exactly. And the cool thing is that tools like Unity, with things like Netcode for GameObjects and Unity gaming services, they're making it so much more accessible for people to actually bring these ideas to life.
That is really cool. So next time you're, battling it out online, playing your favorite game, just take a second to think about all the work that went into making that happen.
Yeah.
All the stuff we talked about today.
All the people. It takes a village.
Exactly. All right, well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. But hey, maybe this has inspired some future game developers out there.
I hope so.
Right. To create the next big online sensation. Until next time, happy gaming.
Happy gaming.